Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and I have just spent the last month backpacking around the Philippines, so I thought I could make a video going through all the different islands, where to stay, where to eat, things to do, and how to get around so that it can help you plan your Philippines trip and maybe decide which islands to go to, which islands to skip, and just all in all help you try and plan the itinerary, because I feel like I had to do quite a bit of research, and so I'm hoping this will kind of compile some of that research into one nice little video for you. Obviously I didn't go everywhere, so I will mention a few islands that I did not go to, so if you want to do your own research on those places, you're more than welcome to. And also grab your phone, open up Google Maps, and maybe start bookmarking some of the places that I mentioned, so that when you go to those places you have heaps of stuff to do and you know where to go eat and that kind of thing. So firstly, I just want to mention I did spend 2 weeks traveling with my best friend, and then I spent 2 weeks traveling solo. So I did a little bit of the solo travel thing and a little bit with a friend. So we did stay in some private rooms, especially when I was with my friend, because then we were able to split the cost. But we did stay in a few dorms and in a few different places, so hopefully I'll be able to recommend a couple of different options in that sense. The other thing I want to mention is that obviously everyone's experiences in different places can be so vastly different. I think it can depend on the weather, it can depend if you make friends and meet new people, so obviously my experiences in different islands might be different from yours or other people or other experiences that you've heard. So obviously sometimes you take things with a grain of salt. This is just from my own experience, and yeah, so I hope that makes sense. So the first place that I'm going to touch on is Cebu City or Cebu Island. From Perth, my friend and I actually flew Perth to Singapore and Singapore to Cebu, but you can actually go direct, I believe, or a lot of people will be flying into Manila, but I'm just going to start with Cebu. So Cebu is an island, but you'll be flying into Cebu City itself, which has an international and a domestic airport. Pretty much Cebu City is just more of a transit place. If you can avoid staying in Cebu City, I would recommend doing so. I think if you are staying in Cebu City though, just stay near the airport because the traffic can be really bad. If you're traveling around the Philippines, you'll likely head back to Cebu City a couple of times potentially, because there's obviously the airport there, and there's also the South Bus Terminal, the North Bus Terminal, and the pier. So those are obviously places that you'll go to get around the island. If you are flying straight into Cebu City, this is the perfect time to get a SIM card and get all the cash out you need, because there's not a huge amount of ATMs around, and obviously if you want a SIM card to go around the Philippines, this is the perfect place to get it. From Cebu City, one of the places that you can go to is Moalboal, and to get to Moalboal you will head to the South Bus Terminal. When you get to the bus terminal, do ask for an aircon bus, and I believe it was just over 200 pesos per person to get the 4 to 5 hour bus from the South Bus Terminal to Moalboal. And the bus was just a big coach, there was aircon, it was actually pretty comfortable, so I definitely recommend doing it this way if you're considering your options, because it's obviously a lot cheaper than getting a private van. That being said, when we were heading back to Cebu City from Moalboal, we ended up getting a private van from our accommodation, which I believe was 3,500 pesos for 2 people, so we split that between the 2 of us, and it just meant that we could go straight to the airport. We weren't worried about being late for our flight, because when you do actually get into Moalboal via the bus, it brings you into like Moalboal City, which is not actually where you want to stay. You want to stay near Panagsama Beach, and that's the main beach where all the tourists go, so I'd recommend looking into that area. There's a few different hostels around, but because I was with my friend, this was where we were going to do some diving. So we actually stayed at a dive resort which was called Cebu Seaview, and it was absolutely beautiful. Again, on the pricier side, we split it between the 2 of us, but this was the nicest accommodation we stayed on the whole trip, so we felt comfortable to splurge. But there's a lot of other options of where you can stay. Where we stayed, they actually have their own dive center, so we just went diving through them, and it was really, really great. I would recommend looking into them. They're probably a little bit more expensive than some other places, but the gear was really good and the service was great, so I definitely would recommend looking into them. As far as places to eat, one of my favorite places to eat probably in all of the Philippines was a place in Moalboal called Ven's Kitchen. It was probably like one of the best places to get Filipino food, I would say. And it's just on the main strip, and you can get Filipino food, you can get mango float, but other places you can eat as well. I've got them written down just here. So they have a Shaka Cafe, and I'll mention Shaka Cafe a few more times because they essentially have one of these in a lot of the main touristy places around the Philippines. There's also a food court, I believe it's just called Moalboal Food Court. You can also go to Trattoria Italian. Again, I think they're a chain because I think you can find them at a few different places around the Philippines. And then also chili bars. My friend and I didn't go because we were actually both sick, but chili bar is the place to go have a drink. I think it's the place that just kind of pops off in the evening. So if you want to go have a drink, go to chili bar. So what are the things that you can do around Moalboal? So off of Panagsama Beach, the most popular thing to do is actually just go snorkeling. And so you can go snorkeling with turtles. There's heaps of turtles right off the main beach. And then you can also go snorkeling with the sardine run or the big sardine bait bowls, which you can do diving or snorkeling. There are tours that take you, but honestly you really don't need a tour. I would recommend bringing your own snorkel and mask or hiring one off the beach, and you can literally just swim off the main beach. We were told to go swimming off of where Chili Bar is, and you just go along the reef, and then there's a reef wall where it drops off, and just go along the reef wall until you find the sardines. And I'm pretty sure they're there almost every day, all year round. So definitely do that because that is the thing to do in Moalboal. I was reading about it, and supposedly it's the second largest bait bowl in the world. So it's definitely a sight to see, and you can go free diving, snorkeling or scuba diving. Other things to do around Moalboal is the canyoneering. That is super popular. Again, I did not do it because I was sick. You can also go to various hikes and waterfalls. So some of the places I had bookmarked that, again, I wasn't able to go to because I was sick. Osmania Peak, Casino Peak, Kankalanog Falls. And you can also go out to White Beach. Panagsama Beach, the main beach, isn't really a sand beach. It's more like you just jump straight into the water. So if you're wanting to go to a white sand beach, you would go out to White Beach via a tuk-tuk. We didn't actually go to the beach because honestly, I feel like there's so many other beautiful beaches around the Philippines that you're going to go to anyway. So there's heaps to do without even going to White Beach. So the next island in the Philippines that I'm going to mention is Siargao Island. The easiest way to get there is literally just getting a flight out of Cebu City straight to Siargao Airport, and then you'll take a 45-minute van ride or tuk-tuk to General Luna, which is kind of like the main area where there is tourism road, and you can kind of stay anywhere in that area. The other way to get to Siargao, which I believe is cheaper, is via ferry, and I believe you get a ferry from Cebu City to Siargao, and then you get another ferry from Siargao to Siargao. When you arrive at Siargao Airport, there will be vans there, and it's pretty much a flat fee. They all come up to you. I believe it was 300 pesos from memory, and they kind of wait for the van to fill up. So it does take a little bit of time, but it doesn't matter who you talk to. There's a few different vans there, and they end up just kind of putting everyone together in one van anyway. We stayed at a hostel called Softer Surf Ranch, which was pretty basic, but it was actually really nice. Again, we got a private room where we had aircon, whereas the dormitories are kind of like an open air area. But it was a really beautiful place, which was in the main General Luna area, which is what we wanted, because since it was right at the beginning of our trip, we didn't really want to have to rent a scooter. One of the other hostels we heard of was called Happiness Hostel, and we did actually go and check it out, and it did look really nice, but I'm not sure how much it is. And you can actually stay anywhere along Tourism Road, and I think the further up you go Tourism Road, the more kind of resort style it becomes. So it just depends what your budget is and where you're wanting to stay. The tuk-tuks are really cheap to get around the island. You definitely could rent a scooter to get around Siargao. It was relatively quiet as far as the islands go, so it definitely would be easy, and I think that's what most people do, so you can go up and down and kind of everywhere in the island as much as you want. And the things to do around Siargao, the main one is surfing, because Siargao is known as the surfing capital of the Philippines. So if you go up to Cloud 9, you can do some surfing there, which I believe is mainly beginner waves, and you can do a lesson there. But there's various other places where you can go surfing around Siargao. So if you're a surfer, definitely look into those other places. Another thing we did was the Siargao land tour. Again, if you're renting a scooter or if you hire a tuk-tuk for a day, you could probably do this on your own. We did this tour through Klook, and essentially it took you to the coconut tree viewing deck. It then took us to Sugba Lagoon, and then it took us to Magpupunko, I think that's how you say it, Magpupunko rock pools, which is really cool. So that was a really great day, but you can definitely do it on your own if you want to. And then you can also do the Siargao Tri-Island tour. So that is island hopping to a few different islands, but because we knew we were going to be doing island hopping in other islands, we kind of just skipped that because we just didn't really have enough time at the end of the day. So places to eat in Siargao in the General Luna area. First recommendation is called Cosmic, and it's a vegan restaurant, I believe, but it was actually so delicious. If we had more time, we would have definitely gone back here more than once. Other places we went to eat was called Tradicion, I think is how you would say it. Again, Filipino food, very delicious. We went to a restaurant called Nudes, which did delicious noodles. We went to a place called the Spotted Pig for breakfast. Across the road is Goodies, and there's a Mexican food truck, and there's also another place called Sev, which does the Filipino ceviche. We did not go there, but I've heard great things about it. And then lastly, they also have a Shaka Cafe up at Cloud 9, so that's obviously a must get an acai bowl on the beach. That is pretty much it for Siargao. So moving on to the next place. The next place I'm going to touch on is Bohol, which I actually didn't go to. I had heard a little bit mixed reviews, and at the end of the day, I just didn't have enough time, so I did not go. But you can get to Bohol very easily from Cebu City via a ferry, which is 800 pesos. I think most people stay in the Panglao area, Panglao Beach. But so essentially Bohol, people go for the Tarsiers, the Chocolate Hills. I'm not 100% sure what else they go for. I know there's really good diving there as well, but I have heard that Bohol is like a little bit more party vibes, I believe, from what I've heard. So it just really depends what you are into, but obviously you can do your own research for Bohol. I actually headed straight to Siquijor from Cebu City. So the ferry from Cebu City goes Cebu City, Bohol, Bohol, Siargao, but you kind of stay on the ferry the whole way there, which ends up being 1,600 pesos. So that is a little bit more of an expensive way to go. I believe a cheaper way to go would be from Cebu City, getting a bus to the tip of Cebu Island, and then you get a ferry to Dumaguete and then another ferry to Siquijor, which you can also do that actually straight from Moalboal. I believe that is cheaper. Obviously there's a little bit more logistics to it, but definitely look into that if you're wanting a cheaper way to get there. But now Siquijor. Siquijor was, I think, my favorite island in the Philippines, which I think is because it was not super built up, it was super laid back. There was still plenty of things to do and plenty of backpackers around to meet and make friends with, so definitely recommend going to Siquijor if you have time. As far as where I stayed, my plan was to stay 2 nights at the Mad Monkey and 2 nights in the San Juan area, which I would probably just recommend staying in the San Juan area. The idea with staying at Mad Monkey for 2 nights was that it's kind of near the waterfalls and it is in the middle of nowhere, but I thought that I would just stay there, eat there, meet people there in one of the dorms and go around the waterfalls from there, and then I would have 2 nights in the San Juan area. But in the end, the Mad Monkey wasn't really everything that I had hoped it would be. I did make some really good friends there that I hung out for the rest of the time while I was in Siquijor, but it just wasn't as busy and as like vibey as other Mad Monkeys that I had heard of. The reviews for it also weren't great, and yeah, it's just really in the middle of nowhere, so you're not really going to be able to get around to other restaurants and things like that, and the food wasn't that great. So just something to keep in mind in that sense. Another thing I forgot to mention is getting around Siquijor is probably the best island to rent a scooter on. I had never rented a scooter before, never ridden a scooter, but I had heard that Siquijor was the best island to learn and to get around. So if you are arriving into Siquijor at a decent time, you can obviously rent the scooter straight from the port, which means you can rent it for however many days that you are in Siquijor and drop it straight off back at the port when you are leaving. I did not want to do that because I was getting in at about 5:30, 6 o'clock, so the sun was already setting, and the Mad Monkey is quite far from the port, so I kind of didn't want to do that for my first scooter ride, like with my backpack and everything. But that is one thing that I think most people do it that way. Most accommodations in Siquijor though let you rent scooters straight from the accommodation, but obviously that is a more expensive way to do it. As far as things to do, I did one day hiring a scooter for the whole day and just going around to the various waterfalls. So I went around with some friends who kind of picked me up with their scooter and we convoyed together to Camiguin Falls, or Camiguin Falls, which is a really popular waterfall. You can do some rope swinging. Just keep in mind it is popular, and the later in the day it gets, the busier it gets. So we went, I think at about 9, and it wasn't too busy, so I'd recommend doing that. We then went out to Siargao Beach, which was also beautiful, and just the ride out there, I think it was maybe like 20 minutes, half an hour ride, but it was just beautiful. There was like no one on the road. It was super chill. I actually really enjoyed riding the scooter. So when you get out to Siargao Beach, there's obviously a beautiful beach there. There's a cafe when you can get lunch and snacks, and you can also go cliff diving there. It's a really popular spot for cliff diving. I'm not exactly sure how tall the two cliff jumps are, but I think the first one's maybe like 5 or 6 meters and the second one's maybe about 10. So it just depends how game you are. From Siargao Beach, we actually rode all the way back towards the falls and went to Lagan Falls. So I think it was about 3 p.m. when we got here, and there was only like one other group of people there, so it was super quiet. You do have to get a guide to go down to Lagan Falls, and they kind of don't tell you how much it is. They just tell you you can tip however much you want, so not exactly sure how much they expect. And the guide essentially just takes you down the steps because it's about a 5-minute walk, and they kind of just make sure you don't slip and fall when you're walking around, because you can actually slide down the rocks. There's a little rope swing as well. But yeah, that was actually such a beautiful place because it was so quiet. So the last stop we went to on our scooter day was the old enchanted Balabac tree. And this is where they have a little fish spa and the fish can nibble your toes. And it's just underneath this beautiful old Balabac tree. And fun fact about Siquijor is that it's kind of known as like the bewitched island. There's lots of healers on the island. You can actually find healers to go to that supposedly heal you, but I would go off of recommendations because I have heard kind of mixed reviews about finding a healer on Siquijor, because some of them seem like a little bit like dark magic apparently. I don't know how much you believe in that stuff, but that is another thing that you can do in Siquijor, is find a healer and get healed. I don't know. So that was kind of our big day out in the scooter, but other things you can do on the island is go to Palawan Beach. That is kind of like the main beach to go to. Often if you get dropped off at Palawan Beach on a tuk-tuk, or if you use Google Maps, they drop you off at this first little beach where there's some little shacks with food. There is a really good food place called Ocean Bowls Siquijor that do really good like rice bowls, but that beach there's not much shade, and I don't think it's technically the true Palawan beach. At least that's what one of the locals told me. If you get dropped off there's like a little area that you can walk through and go to the next Palawan beach, where I think it's also called Boracay Beach, and that is where they have like the palm trees and you can get a coconut, and I don't know, it just feels more like a tropical beach vibe because it's full of palm trees. I think it's called Little Boracay. They will drop you off on that side rather than on the other side, but it's only like a 2-minute walk, so if you got dropped off on that first one you can just walk across anyway. There is signs that say private property, but everyone just walks through there, so I wouldn't worry too much. Another really popular thing to do in Siquijor is to go scuba diving. So there's lots of different scuba diving companies, but I wanted to go specifically out to Apo Island, which is a really popular scuba diving place as well. As far as other places to eat, Baja Bar was a really popular place. Bell's Beach Bar for a drink, beautiful sunset. Marco Polo Italian, also beautiful sunsets. And the last beautiful sunset place is Bu Cafe, which is kind of like up the hill, and it does get very busy, so definitely get there early enough to get a nice seat. And then they also have a Shaka Cafe right on the beach. The last thing is on a Friday night, everyone goes to JJ's Backpackers. That is the place to be, whether you're a tourist or a local, and it was such a vibe. The drinks were relatively cheap and really tasty. I got the most delicious mango daiquiri all night. But yes, that is the place to go on a Friday night. Very much a vibe. So if you're there on a Friday night, make sure you go to JJ's Backpackers. So that is everything for Siquijor, which again, my favorite island. So I would definitely recommend making sure you've got time to head to Siquijor. Sticking with places that you can get to from Cebu Island / Cebu City, the next place I'm gonna touch on is Malapascua. So the first thing I want to mention about Malapascua is it's only really worth going to if you scuba dive. So if you don't scuba dive, I would probably completely skip this island. But if you scuba dive, this is where you can scuba dive with the thresher sharks, which honestly, I had never heard of thresher sharks before this trip and before hearing about Malapascua, but essentially they're these like relatively small sharks with this huge tail, and they're like not threatening to people, and it is actually the most amazing thing. So how you get to Malapascua is you get a bus from the North Bus Terminal, and I believe it's about a 5-hour bus trip to Maya Port, and I think it was about 300 something pesos, so not super expensive. And then from Maya Port, you will get a 45-minute ferry for 200 pesos to Malapascua. So that is quite a big travel day. And so I only got into Maya at about 6, I believe it was. And the last ferry runs at about 5. So I booked to stay one night at Maya Port. I booked to stay at DNN Lodge because it's right where the bus drops you off. And it's a 5-minute walk from where the ferry picks you up in the morning. So definitely recommend staying there. And the owners were super, super lovely. It is only private rooms, so it is a little bit more on the expensive side. So definitely put that into account if you're planning your travels as to whether you want to stay a night in Maya or not. But anyway, I stayed one night there, and then in the morning woke up and then got the ferry to Malapascua. In Malapascua, there's a little bit limited options as far as where to stay. I stayed at a place called Malapascua Garden Resort. Again, I got a private room. It sounds like I'm staying in a lot of private rooms, but these places were towards the end of my trip when I was solo, and so I felt kind of comfortable splurging a little bit, and I was a little bit sick of being in dorms. But obviously, if you are wanting to stay in the dorm, there are options, and one of the options I've heard of is Malapascua Budget Inn, which I've heard is relatively okay, so you can definitely look at staying there. Other than that, there's some beautiful dive resorts around. They're just obviously a little bit more expensive, so I stayed at, like I said, Malapascua Garden Resort, which was absolutely fine. 5-minute walking from the port and 5-minute walking to pretty much anywhere in the main area of Malapascua. I went diving with Ocean Passions, but one of the other places I had heard really good things about is Devotion, and they also seemed like a relatively good price. I think some of the other dive centers are a lot more expensive. So if you do scuba dive, I would definitely recommend getting out there, or if you want to learn to scuba dive, you can also do that there. Moving on now to the Palawan region. Kind of encompasses El Nido and Coron and Port Barton. So they're quite popular places and the most popular places to do island hopping. So starting with El Nido. El Nido is probably the place I had heard the most about prior to going to the Philippines. So getting to El Nido, you can fly directly into El Nido Airport, but it is on the more expensive side. It was cheaper for us to fly into Puerto Princesa and then get a van from Puerto Princesa to El Nido, which was about 700 pesos per person, and it was a like 5 to 6 hour van ride, so a bit of a transit day. But El Nido is a super popular place, loads and loads of backpackers, and the place where we stayed was called Friends Hostel, which I think is like the most popular, most sought after hostel maybe in the Philippines, but definitely in El Nido, and I can absolutely see why. It was one of the best hostels we stayed at. The dorms were great with curtains on the beds, and there was a rooftop pool. They do get booked out pretty far in advance, or sometimes people get lucky with last minute cancellations, but if you are wanting to stay there, definitely book ahead of time if you can. Friends Hostel also do their own island hopping tour, so that is one of the main things you can do out of El Nido is island hopping. So we did it with VANLIFE, which I think is part of Friends Hostel, and they essentially just take you to a few different islands. All the different tour companies have like tour A, B, C, D, and honestly, I feel like they're all kind of the same. So I wouldn't stress too much about picking the right one. Other things to do in El Nido is the zip line. That was actually so fun. I would recommend doing the zip line at sunset or just before sunset, so that when you get down onto the beach, the sun is setting and you can have dinner there, and it is such a beautiful vibe because you can't actually see the sunset from El Nido town. You can also do this canopy walk, which apparently you get beautiful views, but that closes at about 5. We didn't actually get time to do that. All the tuk-tuk drivers will also be asking you if you want to go out to Nakpan Beach. It is a 30 or 40 minute tuk-tuk ride from El Nido town, and that's actually where the Mad Monkey hostel is for El Nido, so it's quite far out of the town. And again, it's just like a sand beach. Again, we weren't that fussed about going so far away just for a sand beach. There are plenty of beautiful beaches that you'll go to on the island hopping tours anyway. Moving on to the next thing, which is not actually a place, but it is the best thing that I did in the Philippines that I did with my friend, and it is the expedition from El Nido to Coron. It goes the other way as well, so if you're in Coron, you can do the expedition to get to El Nido, and there are various lengths of time that you can do the expedition for, but the most popular one is the 3-day, 2-night expedition, which essentially just takes you onto these beautiful remote islands, the most incredible snorkeling spots, and you get to camp in like little huts at these islands, and it is just the coolest experience. You get to spend 3 days with people and make some really, really good friends. So that was honestly the best thing that we did in the Philippines, and I would definitely recommend looking into that if you have the budget for it, because it is a little bit more expensive. We also did it through Kiluma Tours, which we had the best experience, and I feel like a lot of things in the Philippines, there are so many different tour companies, and I was kind of thinking that they were all kind of the same, but I did hear a few differing experiences on differing tours for this expedition, so just keep that in mind and maybe go off of recommendations for which tour to go with. So if you do the expedition, that will then take you to Coron. Otherwise, you can also just take a ferry from El Nido to Coron, which I believe is obviously cheaper and quicker. But so let's now delve into Coron. So like I said, you can get there via the expedition or the ferry, but you can also fly into the airport there. When you arrive into the airport, there are heaps of people there, all with vans for specific hostels or accommodation. So I literally just went there to where there's all the people with their vans, and I said, I'm going to Bam Bam Hostel, and one guy was like, yep, I'm Bam Bam Hostel, and so it was only 250 pesos to get all the way into town, which I believe was not too bad. So like I said, I stayed at Bam Bam Hostel. There's some other really popular hostels like Hop Hostel. They are beautiful, but they book out in advance, and obviously there's heaps of other options that you can look into as well, but Bam Bam is kind of like right in the center of where the food places are, so that was a really convenient spot for us, and it was also walking distance from the port for any tours or things like that. So things to do in Coron is again island hopping, so there are heaps of different island hopping tours. The most common tour that everyone was doing when I was there was called the Super Ultimate Tour. I don't really know what the differences are between the different tours, and we just did it through the one that our hostel recommended, but this is one of those things that there are so many different companies that do this same tour that's literally called the Super Ultimate Tour, and I just think they're the same at the end of the day, so it doesn't really matter who you book through. Other really popular thing to do in Coron is scuba diving the shipwreck. So again, if you're a scuba diver, definitely have one day reserved to do a big scuba diving day where you go out to the shipwrecks and you go to some reefs as well. I did it through French Kiss Divers, but probably the most popular dive center in Coron is called Reggae Divers. Another dive center I heard of was called Safety Stop Divers, which I'd heard good things, but but there's obviously heaps of other dive centers as well that you can look into. The great thing about the diving in Coron was that it was cheaper than say Malapascua or even going out to Apo Island, so you could definitely do multiple days whilst having a bit of a smaller budget when it comes to diving. You can also do free diving tours, which I did this as well, which does take you to some of the same places as just the regular island hopping tours, for example Barracuda Lake. But the really cool thing about doing this on a free dive tour is they kind of take you out of the general area and you get to go further within the lake, and obviously you get to hire some free diving fins and get to do some actual free diving. You can also do free diving courses here. Honestly, it was so cool, especially Barracuda Lake, because when you get to about 12, 13, 14 meters, it goes from freshwater to salt water. It's actually 38 degrees at that point when it changes to salt water, so it's ridiculously warm, but it was such a cool thing to experience. You can also scuba dive at Barracuda Lake, which would have been really cool, but I feel like all the dive centers that I spoke to, they were all going to the shipwrecks, because it seemed most people that were diving in Coron were wanting to go to shipwrecks and not wanting to go to Barracuda Lake. Back to the free diving tour. If you are wanting to do a free diving tour, definitely look into doing it with Palawan. They have various different free diving tours where you can go quite a fair way away but go snorkeling with dugongs, or they do these normal free diving tours to Barracuda Lake. They take you to this really cool cave. Honestly, that was probably my favorite day, was doing that free diving tour. So definitely look into that if you're interested in free diving. Other things you can do in Coron is climbing up Mount Tapias. I would recommend doing that at sunset. Hopefully it's cooling down a little bit because there are a lot of stairs to get to the top, but there's a beautiful sunset from there, and they have live music, or at least when I was there, and that is where they have the big Coron sign on the hill. Other things you can do is the hot springs. Again, it was so hot when we were there. I don't know why you would even need to go to hot springs, but so we went close to when they were closing. So they close at 8. I think we got there about 7:15, which honestly was plenty of time. And because people were leaving because it was close to closing, we actually got the place completely to ourselves at the end, which was pretty cool. And the last experience that I did not get to do because it is seasonal is this mangroves tour, where there's bioluminescence in the water and fireflies, and it just sounds amazing. I met this one girl who said she had done it, so definitely look into the mangrove bioluminescence tour when you're in Coron and just see if it is in season and see if you can find a tour that will take you on it. As far as places to eat in Coron, Bam Bam Bar, which is part of the Bam Bam Hostel, is a really popular place, and they have live music every night, I believe. There's also heaps of other little eating places in that little complex that you can order from. Across the road there is a cafe called Epic Cafe, and that is where me and my friend got breakfast every morning and got a coffee or a tea. There is another Trattoria, which is that Italian restaurant that's at various islands in the Philippines. There's a place that people recommended called Inasal Eats, which is more authentic Filipino food. We didn't get a chance to eat there, unfortunately. And there's also a Japanese place called Izakaya, which again was really nice. So yes, that is Coron. So there is another experience or expedition that I did not get to do, and that is called the Balabac Island tour. I just had heard really great things about it, so I thought I would include it in this video. It is very similar, I believe, to the expedition from El Nido to Coron, where it's quite remote. It is not luxury living at all, but they do tours in the South Palawan region. So I believe you would get there maybe from Puerto Princesa. I will link the Instagram that someone sent me in the description. It's definitely for people who are prepared for a lack of comfort, I should say. At least that's what I've heard. We're slowly getting to the end of this. The next place I'm going to mention is Manila. So getting to Manila, you'd probably fly into Manila and you might start your Philippines travels from there, or maybe you'll fly out of Manila. A lot of people that we spoke to kind of talk about Manila like Cebu City and kind of say don't stay there if you don't have to. It's just a really built up city and it's not very nice. But my friend and I, we stayed one night in Manila and we actually really enjoyed it. I've heard that you should stay in the Makati area, which is relatively close to the airport, and I think it's just the slightly nicer area, maybe a younger crowd around there, I believe. And where we stayed was called Z Hostel. And the great thing about Z Hostel is that they have a rooftop bar, and they actually also do a walking tour around the Makati area every night. So that was a really great way to see a little bit of Manila and to also meet a few other people. So we actually really enjoyed this little walking tour to really just get a bit of a taste for Manila. But yeah, I wouldn't say that you probably need to stay much longer than a night or two if you don't have to. Now I'm going to touch on a few more places that I did not go to. So one of them is Boracay. So Boracay, I believe, became a really popular place years ago. So now it's become a bit too touristy and a little bit more expensive. I have heard that there is a lot to do. There's island hopping, there's lots of activities, there's lots of nightlife and shopping, but it is just that little bit more built up, which means it's just that little bit more expensive. So I've just heard mixed reviews about it, which is why I decided to skip it. But I have heard there are some really stunning beaches there. So definitely look into that if that is your vibe. The other place that I did not go to and I probably wouldn't recommend going to is called Oslob, and that is the place that everyone goes to go snorkeling with whale sharks. But there are questions about the ethical side of it because they do feed the whale sharks to get into this area. But I have heard that another place that you can go scuba diving with whale sharks is in Donsol, which I believe you get there from Manila. I'm not 100% sure. Again, you know, it's all a little bit debatable and a bit controversial as to what is deemed as ethical and what is not ethical. So again, do your own research, but I have heard that Donsol is a little bit more ethical, specifically if you are scuba diving, because I've heard that the snorkeling boats are more likely to chase the whale sharks. Again, it's completely up to you. Obviously, that is just my personal view and what I've heard. I've personally gone snorkeling with whale sharks in Australia, in Exmouth, and obviously it being Australia, they try their best to be like the most ethical and considering the animal wholeheartedly. So it obviously would be a very different experience doing that in somewhere like the Philippines. The last island I'm going to touch on is an island called Camiguin. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it is an island off of Siquijor. It is again a more untouched island and there's a lot less tourists there, but supposedly there are the most beautiful beaches. So definitely recommend going there, especially if you are with a friend. I have just heard mixed reviews in terms of solo traveling, and at the time I was solo. So you can get there from one of the ports in Siquijor, and actually from Camiguin I believe you can go straight to Bohol from there as well. So that brings us to the end of my list of islands and my little tips for how to get around. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, if I'm able to answer them, I'll answer them in the comments below. Otherwise, there's obviously heaps more resources out there where you can find some more information. But yeah, like I said, I really hope this helps you plan your trip. I hope you have the best time in the Philippines if and when you go. So thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye.